Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. We're only a few minutes late. Blame that on me. Welcome to the Regional Family and Youth and Health Task Force. Today, the subject, well, first off, Mr. Vargas, how about if we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and Mr. Vargas will lead us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, today we're going to talk about human trafficking, a subject of great interest to all of us. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Melissa Donaldson from SAFE to introduce our guest speaker. But I just wanted to throw a few things at you. The other night I told a story about domestic violence. And that lady who was the victim of domestic violence, I asked her this afternoon, I said, so when you had that job as the worst job in your life, she was the deputy of the Missing and Exploited Children's Task Force for the FBI. I said, what are the numbers? And she said, if you look at under the United Nations report in the year 2008, there were 2.5 million children and women that were taken, not volunteered, taken from 127 nations and placed in 137 nations. That means that there were an awful lot of predators out there willing to take all those young girls and in some cases young boys for the purposes of mostly sexual slavery, not all, but mostly sexual slavery. And one of the reasons we're here today discussing this topic is because most people have a tendency to hesitate. If you see something happening on the street that doesn't look quite right, most people just kind of scratch their head and say, well, that kind of looked like that young girl was being forced into that car. And then they drive on and do nothing. Answer, if you see something that doesn't look right, get involved, dial 911 and report it. Now, with no further ado, Melissa Donaldson from SAFE, would you please introduce our guest?
Well, I'd like to introduce you to Gabriela Baeza, and I'm so proud of myself I could say her last name right. And I've had the pleasure of spending the last hour with her, and I'm very excited that we're talking about this topic because this topic relates to every topic that we've talked about since we've started this task force. It goes back to the family and at-risk youth. And this is one topic that's a hard thing to discuss, and people don't think it happens in Riverside County, but it does. And Gabriela works in the San Diego County Office of Education since 1999, and I decided she must have been very, very young when she started. She's a member of the Student Support Services Department and is responsible for coordinating and implementing violence prevention intervention services to various school districts in the county. Gabriela leads her expertise and professional skills on a state and national level, as well as through her private consulting business, which has brought her to us today. She was actually recommended to us through Wayne Sakamoto from Murrieta School District. And she does gender-specific programming, and one of them is Girls Circle, which SAFE does too. So we had a lot of really good conversation today with the goal of what can we do in our own neighborhoods to help these young girls. And also I wanted to bring someone from out of county because we can learn from what other places are doing. And she's got a lot of expertise and great ideas. So I'm thrilled that she's here today, and this is Gabriela Baeza.
Okay, welcome, Gabrielle. We are really happy to have you here. And Madam City Clerk, rather than just read the, take attendance, just read the names on the nameplates of the folks who are sitting up here in the dais and down below us, and that way we'll know who is here. But welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
I don't know if I have everyone in attendance, so I'll just go ahead and call. Can I call roll call? And
Okay, we'll do it
Thank
that
you.
way. Won't
Okay.
take long.
City of Temecula Mayor Mike Nagar.
Not here.
City of Temecula Mayor Pro Tem Marianne Edwards.
Not here.
Temecula Valley Unified School District Board President, Dr. Christy Rutz Robbins. City of Murrieta Mayor Rick Gibbs.
I am here.
City of Murrieta Councilmember Alan Long.
He's not here.
Murrieta Valley Unified School District Board President Chris Tomasian. City of Canyon Lake Mayor Mary Creighton.
He's here.
City of Canyon Lake Councilmember Tim Brown. City of Hemet Mayor Robert Youssef. City of Hemet Councilmember Shelley Milne.
Here.
Hemet Unified School District Board Member Ross Valenzuela. City of Lake Elsinore Mayor Pro Tem Natasha Johnson. City of Lake Elsinore Councilmember Steve Manos.
Here.
Lake Elsinore Unified School District Board President Tom Thomas. Menifee Union School District Board Member Jerry Bowman.
Here.
City of Paris Councilmember Julio Rodriguez. City of Paris Councilmember Rita Rogers. Paris Union High School District Board President Bill Holstrom. Val Verde Unified School District Board President Michael Vargas.
Here.
City of San Jacinto Mayor Mark Bartel.
Here.
City of San Jacinto Councilmember Crystal Ruiz. San Jacinto Unified School District Board President John Norman.
Here.
City of Wildemar Councilmember Ben Benoit.
Not here.
City of Wildemar Councilmember Bridget Moore.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Gabriela, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me, Melissa, and the council. I appreciate you having me come on up. And audience, I apologize for having my back turned to you, but I understand this is our setup. I want you all to know I work with youth about 50% of the time, so being locked into a podium is a very strange feeling for me. But we're going to make it work. We're always flexible as educators and as counselors, so please understand my frame of reference. I like to have lessons be interactive and engaging. I have learned in my time with youth that is how they learn the most, not by reading off slides and directly from a book. We have to engage them. So I'm hoping you go along with me on this 1 hour journey and be as engaged as we possibly can be this evening. The topic of commercial sexual exploitation is not an easy topic to discuss. It is one that usually upsets a lot of people, but I appreciate the fact that you're being proactive. And I want you to know this is something that is not, no city's immune from this. That's the unfortunate side about this topic. Whether it's a small city, rural, large metropolitan area, it doesn't matter. This is an issue that's impacting our youth at a tremendous level. So I'm hoping to raise your level of awareness and give you some background, some risk factors that we can actually look for in the kids and families that we work with that could potentially put them at higher risk. So that's the framework that I'll be working with you today. I'll show you a little video that kind of brings home the message and how important it is that we support kids from the get-go. Not when they're already involved, but rather that we're truly doing that prevention work, as we know that makes the biggest difference for them. You all have the PowerPoint in front of you. You have my email and phone number. I encourage you to follow up with me if you'd like me to send you additional resources from what we provided. You're more than welcome to give me a call or email me. I'd be happy to share with you the different services that we provide. I'm responsible in San Diego, just so you all know, for providing gender-responsive services. So I have a really neat and amazing job because I get to hang out with youth, primarily girls. I know some people would think that's insane. I actually like to work with middle school and high school girls, believe it or not. It's actually a lot of fun. They teach me more than any book or degree I have, believe it or not. Working with the youth has taught me more than anyone else. But what's interesting is I am responsible for looking at the latest trends. So what is impacting them? And what research is actually telling us why it's contributing to those risk factors? How can we help them? What can we do? What exists? What programs are already in place? So that's why we're here, is basically scratching the surface with this particular topic, planting a seed, and then hopefully giving you some basic tools that then you can take to continue this dialogue. It doesn't end after a 1 hour presentation. It's just the beginning. And there's some cities that are much further along than even my own county, but we all start somewhere. So I appreciate, again, the fact that we're getting together and starting to have this very important discussion, and I sincerely hope that it continues beyond just today. So I want to just start to give everyone a frame of reference so we're on the same page, and that's a lot of terminology is oftentimes thrown out when we're looking at sexual exploitation and sex trafficking and people smuggling, and there's a lot of terms that are oftentimes confusing. So I just want to go over these very quickly So we're all on the same page as far as what the issue is. I am talking about commercial sexual exploitation of children. A lot of the times people use sex trafficking, human trafficking, and you'll see the major difference between the two and why we use CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children. So just off the bat, I want you to understand when we talk about human trafficking, this is in a nutshell the definition that we're working from. And I want to point out to you that the last bullet point is what I really want to focus on with everyone. When you're looking at all acts that involve recruitment, abduction, transport, harboring, transfer, sale, or receipt of persons within national or across international borders through force, fraud, or deception, or coercion. That's that key part that I want you to really look at, those last few words. Human trafficking has to meet this definition, has to have included those components, meaning through force, fraud, deception, or coercion. You'll see in a second, the difference between sexual exploitation and human trafficking is that sexual exploitation of children does not need to include force, fraud, or coercion. You're talking about a minor. The fact that they're under 18, the fact that you're profiting from selling them in any way, shape, or form makes the act illegal. Those are the two major differences. So I do want to leave you with that you consider using that terminology as commercial sexual exploitation of children. And we'll get into the different categories that fall under that umbrella. You use CSEC as an umbrella, but there's major components that fall under that as well. So I just wanted to make that very clear for everyone. Again, human trafficking is across national borders, international borders as well. CSEC, that has nothing to do with where the kids are living or residing, what county or what country. If it is a child, it is sexual exploitation. It does not have to include fraud, coercion, or anything like that. Okay, those are the major differences. So I want you to just quickly think about when we have two words. This is what I always ask my youth. I want you to consider two words, and I want you to be very honest in your responses. Oftentimes we place labels and have assumptions of people by how society or groups of people have been labeled. So there's two words I want you to think of. The first word is the word prostitute, and the second word is the word victim. So with the word prostitute, we just imagine a column. What are some things that come into our mind? What are some assumptions or judgments that we have when we hear that word? Say that again.
Sex for pay.
Sex for pay, thank you. What else do we think of? Hear the word prostitute. And I will tell you, youth are usually, there's no filter involved in their responses. I will tell you at this point, I have heard it all. So please be honest in what you think our youth and our community thinks when they hear that word.
Voluntary. Voluntary.
Voluntary, this is a choice. It's a real common one that youth share. Thank you. What else when we hear that word prostitute?
Financial hardship.
Financial hardship.
Uneducated.
Uneducated. Think about the youth that we're serving. What would youth say when they hear that word? Say some pretty harsh terms. Slut. Thank you for taking a risk with me. They say that in a lot worse. But that label of calling somebody a slut when they hear the word prostitute comes to mind. Thank you for your honesty.
I teach women's history.
Okay, you're around kids all the time. What else when we hear that word?
Economic opportunity.
Economic opportunity. Kids would say, AK, that's a gold digger. That's what a youth would say. That's exactly how a youth would put it. Something she wants. The choice she made. She must like having sex a lot. She likes men. This is the, sorry?
Desperate.
Desperate, thank you. It's a very common response. Does it because she likes it. They'll say some very explicit terms too that I won't repeat, but you can only imagine. So now when you think of the word victim, if there was a column on the other side, what terms come to mind when you hear that word?
Someone exploited.
Someone who's exploited, thank you. What else?
Forced.
Forced. What else?
Weak.
Weak. Any other ones? Needs help. Doesn't have a voice. Vulnerable. Fragile. Helpless. When we think of a victim, we label them in a very different way than when we hear the word prostitute. That's the one thing I want all of you in the audience and people at home. We don't ever call a child a prostitute. It's an ongoing paradigm shift that we're in teaching law enforcement and community people. They are a child. They are a victim of commercial sexual exploitation. They are not a prostitute. You can't be a prostitute at 12, 13 years old, although that is the average age of a victim in this country. 12 to 14, statistics tell us, is the average age of a victim of prostitution in the United States. I'm not talking about Thailand. I'm not talking about Indonesia. I'm talking about in the United States. 12 to 14 puts them at middle school. That's why this issue is so important that we talk about. So when we think victim, we want to help a victim, right? They need our help. When I see prostitute, not always so willing to open our doors, right? When people have those negative labels. So I want you to leave you with that term today, is when you're referring to somebody who has been involved and exploited, they have been prostituted, or they are a victim of prostitution. I love it when my high school kids get the term. So they'll say, oh, they're a victim. Right. She's not a prostitute. She's a victim. It's a different frame of reference that we're working from. Again, because they're children. They don't always have a voice. So if anything, you can leave with that today saying, oh, new terminology that we need to begin to use as providers, as council members, as community people. Victim of prostitution, or they have been prostituted. Most kids, girls that I meet in juvenile hall, for example, they don't understand that they're a victim. They don't see that that something has been done to them. They look at it as, oh, well, this is just what I know. They don't realize that it's wrong, against the law, and that they're being used. They don't see it that way. So when you introduce the word victim, it's a whole new frame of reference for them. It's a whole new concept for them. And no one has ever taken ownership or apologized for that type of behavior of things that have happened to them. So something I want you to consider. I do want you to see a video. It actually comes from Riverside County. It's a very interesting case and a very timely case of a gal named Sarah Cruzan. You'll see that Sarah Cruzan had some major risk factors in her life, and I wanted to definitely cover that with you today, because there are some things that we know can put kids in a particular dangerous path. Every child is at risk in my mind because they have access to internet, and we'll get into that later, but that's one way that kids are vulnerable. But Sarah Cruzan's case is very interesting because she is a youth who had everything. She was an honor roll student, but had some things going on in the family and in the community that put her on a different path. So I want to show the video clip. It does play for about 7 minutes. I have known Sarah Cruzan for the last 6 years and have the privilege of writing to her and have students that reflect on her story, and it gets kids to open up. I'll share with you some feedback that students have given to me after seeing her film, because it is extremely powerful. So I do want to start with this to get us into the mindset that we need to begin to, one, first of all, look at these kids as victims, and then two, what are these risk factors that we need to look at, and three, where do we need to begin to put our resources to be able to actually tackle this problem at the ground level. So here's Sarah's story. Again, plays for about 7 minutes, and then I'll recap.
In school, I excelled. I was on the honor roll, and the principal's honor roll, and I was like an overachiever. I ran track, I ran for student body president. I wrote a book on drugs and its effects, and I won a Young Authors Award. Gigi would start to take me or my little friends to roller skating or to the mall and stuff and everything. And he was like a father figure. Gigi was there at sometimes. And he would talk to me and take me out and like give me all these lavish gifts or do all these things for me and stuff. And then he would tell me that sex-wise, he said, you don't need to give it up for free. He would try to put in my head all these different things and how men really think and how men are, and so I would believe him. He had sex with me when I was 13, and he's a very, he uses his manhood to hurt, like break you in, I guess. Gigi's hours were from 6 in the evening to about 5:30 to 6 in the morning. The girls would bring their money and give it to him and stuff. He was like married to all of us, I guess. That's just how they do. Everything was his. The judge sat up there, and I remember my lawyer saying that he wanted to ask for me to be sentenced as a juvenile because YA had found me amenable and susceptible to the treatment. But the judge said that because of my crime, and he said it was well thought out, that I deserved the life without. That means I'm gonna die here. I definitely know I deserve punishment. I mean, you don't just take somebody's life and think that it's okay. So yes, definitely deserve punishment. How much? I don't know. Every day is it's something that's not going to ever go away, you know? I'm very sorry to take his life like that. I've always tried to educate myself though, as far as reading books and things like that. But I didn't think I could excel, you know? And who wants to excel in prison? I mean, be all you can be, it's not much. I guess my little heart would tell me that I was worth more. My judge had told me I lacked moral scruples. And I understand that. I had no clue what morals were, and I had no clue what scruples meant. So I had to find that in a dictionary and put the two together, you know, so integrity or, you know, honesty and all these things that I needed to learn, I went ahead and started to build this. If I had a parole hearing, I would want to tell the people that, first of all, I've learned what moral scruples are. Second, that every day is a challenge, but I realized that I don't know, I'm nervous, that I found the ability to believe in myself, and that I have a lot of good to offer. Now, the person who I am today at 29, I believe that I could set a positive example. I'm very determined to show that no matter what you've done or where you've come from or what you've experienced in life, it's up to you to change.
That's Sarah's story. You think of those two terms again, victim and prostitute. So when she went through the justice system, how do you think she was labeled?
Prostitute.
Right? Yeah. Absolutely, prostitute. She was labeled a victim. How would her story be different? Probably wouldn't be showing you her video, right?
hopefully, if she was labeled a victim, she would have been tried as a child.
Mm-hmm. Right. She kills her trafficker, pimp. Okay. She got the plus 4 years because it was with a firearm. A lot of students ask me, why plus, how do you do a life term plus 4 years? I don't know the answer to that. Okay. But the risk factors that were present, there were some that you saw in her video. What was happening behind the scenes? What was going on in her life? Mother was addicted to drugs. Anytime there's someone in the household, parent, guardian, sibling, who is abusing, substance abuser, major risk factor for kids, right? What else was going on in her background?
She didn't have a chance to be a child.
No chance to be a kid, right? At 13 years old, she's recruited by a 32-year-old. That's why it's so important when I do my work with young ladies. There's no reason any adult male should ever be talking to you on Facebook, on Snapchat, on Ask FM, etc. At school, at a mall. It's never appropriate. What else was in her background?
Abuse.
Abuse. The number one reason why kids end up in the system is through some type of traumatic experience. Typically for girls, it involves physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. The majority of them, when they are incarcerated, end up in drug rehab homes. When we're looking at the history, is major impact of that physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And no one asks. They just think, well, she's a pretty angry child. She doesn't want to come into my after-school program, but it's really cool. I don't get it. She must not want the services. So you have to go home with them to really understand what's happening. It's not you and your wonderful program and services. It's everything that's going on that we don't oftentimes see. So it paints a different picture, right? When we think prostitute, when we think victim, very different. The update to Sarah's case, she says she's 29 in the video. She's actually 35. She looks a lot younger. She's 35. She's done now more than 19 years at Chowchilla State Prison. She's still there. The update to her case, and it's so nice that I can give you an update because there has been movement in her case. She was granted the ability to go before a parole board in June 14th, I believe it was. And they said that she should be free to leave. In California, though, it is up to the governor to make that final decision. The governor has 150 days after the parole board makes a recommendation to make a final decision. 150 days is up November 9th. November 9th. I want you all to mark that date on your calendar. I'll be sending Melissa an email as soon as I know. November 9th, this woman has done more than 19 years. Because 19 years ago, we treated kids as prostitutes. We labeled them as such. Now it's finally shifting. We're in that paradigm shift. We're finally looking at them as victims, which is what they are. So when I share this with kids, you'd be amazed. Because for the first time, they see someone who's talking about those risk factors that, oh, they are actually experiencing as well. So when we're able to bring in stories, not always from a textbook, into their life, they can actually relate. I can't tell you how many times kids have self-disclosed of abuse, where their own parent was trying to exploit them for money because of a drug habit, or an older boyfriend was trying to sell them online through Facebook, other websites. So some of the feedback, you can see here, some of the nice reflection letters that kids write. They write amazing things, but I wanted to pick out some that I thought would really stand out to all of you. So the first one here, and these are all high school level kids. When I do this lesson, it's 9th through 12th grade. The top one here. So I myself have been through the possibility of starting prostitution, but I chose not to go along with it because my friends helped me to get away from that lifestyle. The bottom one, you can see she writes, when I was in the 2nd grade, there was this kid that was in the 6th grade, and this kid already knew about sex and stuff. He started taking advantage of me, and to this day I don't trust men. This is a high school kid, and no one has bothered to ask her what has been going on in her background. But says quite a bit in just that short paragraph. Tells you a lot of where she's coming from. Then these two. My father's a user and an alcoholic. I was 4 when I was raped by my dad. Your story really touched me a lot. I've had a similar experience like yours, but I was raped. These are high school kids. So when we think, oh, this doesn't really happen, you know, they live in a nice area, high SES, The SES doesn't matter. Socioeconomic status does not matter when it comes to CSEC. They don't care how much money your parents make or don't make, is whether or not you're vulnerable. That's what a lot of those perpetrators are after, is whether or not they can get into your mind and get you to believe that it's going to be you and him against everyone else and you're going to have a wonderful life together. So the money or what your parents do for a living, that doesn't matter. I've met kids from very affluent neighborhoods that still ended up being victimized because needs weren't being met at home. And I've met kids who were poverty-stricken, who didn't have love and support at home and were looking for it from someone else and found it in, unfortunately, a trafficker. So this story hopefully brings home that point that although the system is changing, as you all know, it's slow sometimes to change laws and things like that. But the good thing is that we're hoping that on November 9th, Sarah can be that example that we no longer treat children in this country as prostitutes, but that we treat them as victims. That's the hope. So I'll give you all an update November 9th. So like I said, mark that on your calendar. It's an important day. We're hoping that, it's ironic that I'm here today because she sent me 3 different packages today. She sent me some nice little cutouts to give to students with positive words and encouraging thoughts of, stay positive and believe in yourself. She says that at the very end. I always point that out to kids. I finally found the ability to believe in myself, if you caught that at the very end. She found the ability to believe in herself while she was in prison, which I find very ironic. Because she should find the ability to believe in herself while she's in our schools, in our programs, in our Boys and Girls Clubs, in our after-school programs, etc. That's where the kids are supposed to find that, not in a state prison. She found it one way or another. She got it, which is great. But again, we're finally doing that shift. It's taken us a long time, but we're slowly getting there. So I wanted to share that. There's 2 websites that you're welcome to visit that trace her history. It has the video if you want to share it with somebody. That's one thing I encourage you to do, is talk to somebody at home, talk to a neighbor, talk to a family member, and just share with them, hey, by the way, I learned something today. We don't use the word prostitute when referring to a child. We use it, they have been prostituted or they are a victim of prostitution. I saw this interesting video. You should show it. Show it in your programs. Get people excited about this topic. So I'll leave you with those 2 websites. That's Sarah and her aunt. She's got 2 aunts that still live in California, so there'll be a support network for her, and then plus a few people that she's connected through the years. So we're hoping we'll see her in San Diego soon. I'll let you all know. I did want to cover with you the basic ways or places of recruitment for this particular issue. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on the internet because that's such a huge one that's very hard for us to get away with, right? It's hard to unplug. We've got smartphones. People, I'm sure, are checking into City Hall on Facebook, putting a post, Twitter accounts. It's hard for us to disconnect. I get that. But it can also be a very dangerous place for kids if they're not careful with who they're connecting with. So that's one, if there's parents in the room or in the audience or at home watching, I do want you to be vigilant when you're introducing this into your home. Oftentimes people say, well, I want to track my child and I'm nervous when I can't find them after school. That's a really good reason to give a kid a cell phone. However, you can't always keep track of what it is that they're doing on that smartphone. Those Facebook accounts, Twitters, Ask FM, Feed is one that I want you to really look at. That PHEED is a growing one that a lot of young people are involved in. It's almost like a combination of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube all in one. The problem is a lot of the sexual exploitation begins to happen through social media, because it's how kids connect nowadays, right? They don't hang out, at meetings after school. They tend to socialize through social media. So that presents itself as a very dangerous option for a lot of kids. Posting pictures, there's some, Snapchat, for example, is a very common one that you might hear that kids are using, Snapchat. So basically kids can post a picture for 2 seconds. I think the max is maybe 10 seconds. The fact that they can post a picture and then it just vanishes in what they think is forever. There's no forever in cyber world, right? Once the image is taken, it can always be tracked. So there's kids who will be posting a lot of inappropriate, sexually explicit pictures, and because they disappear in 2 seconds, they think it's safe. They think it's okay to do that. So it's something I want people to be mindful of. It's never okay to do that, and then you're opening yourself up for people that definitely want to have access to you and those pictures, etc. There is also, just so you know, I can't think of the name, it escapes me at this point, but and it might be Feed. It may not be. But there are websites now where basically you create a profile, post pictures, but you as the person who owns that profile can now charge anyone on the outside who wants to have access to your pictures and information. You can charge anywhere from $1.99 to $34.99. So you can imagine, I already heard it from the audience, that, not a good idea, right? Predators can begin to solicit these young men and women, primarily women though, and they're going to pay $34.99 because they're going to think, for $34.99, what is she going to give me to, what access am I going to get in that profile? So something to be very mindful of. That internet and smartphones are great. Technology is a wonderful tool if it's used appropriately. But we need to give kids that balance of you need to be safe. I know you've had some education on that already, but just being vigilant with that, because sexual exploitation, that's one way that it can happen for a lot of our kids. Residential brothels, we see these oftentimes in rural areas where there's crops that can happen in those situations. Street prostitution, which is the most common form. When people think of that, they think of a red light district. That's what they tend to see, where girls are walking a certain boulevard. And people have this idea that it's going to look like the movie Pretty Woman. That's not what it looks like, and you don't end up with your trafficker at the end. That's a Hollywood glamorized version of prostitution, and that's not how it actually happens. It's the complete opposite. And unfortunately, a lot of people have that misperception of, oh, it's a choice and it's something she wants to do. And that's why I remind people it's not always this clear choice when you have had multiple risk factors in the background. It's not always so black and white. Massage parlors are very notorious for offering additional services to potential clients, and so that holds true for CSEC as well, where kids are being forced to work there. Truck stops is very common, same as train stations, anywhere where there's mobile populations. Taxi cab hubs, for example, downtown areas, very common where kids are hanging out, especially kids who have run away, kind of hanging out, waiting for someone to give you some money for food, etc. So they definitely can be preyed on in those areas. Strip clubs and then escort services. Craigslist, as you know, was notorious for having pages that promoted escort services, and then once it was shut down, people just transferred over to another website to continue that type of behavior. So it wasn't just because Craigslist shut down that particular segment doesn't mean that other websites aren't still promoting it as well. Something to consider. So I want to point this one out to you, that when we're looking at kids who unfortunately fall into this category, is kids who have been labeled as runaways or throwaways, and I want to explain the two terms. When a child runs away, it is a child who has been reported missing. So there's a report. Parent, legal guardian went down to the police station and said, my kid has been missing. A throwaway child is a kid who's been missing and is never reported. Kids who just have kind of fallen off the face of the earth, and family members have not reported this child missing. But many kids in the hall said, they didn't do a missing report on me, and I was gone for several weeks before I surfaced. That's the majority of kids when we're looking at kids hanging out at truck stops, hanging out in places where they shouldn't be, because they're an extremely vulnerable population. Foster care population is another one that's very vulnerable because they're a very mobile group as well, and they don't have those protective factors of family, support, etc. So something I want you to consider. And then some other risk factors that we know of. I do want you to be aware of these. So individual factors and environmental factors. And it does not mean if you are thinking of a youth, oh my gosh, unstable home life. It does not necessarily mean that it's CSEC. It could be all sorts of other things that they could potentially be involved in. But these are just some that I want you to consider. So have they run away from home? Are they in the foster care system? Does she already have low self-esteem? Low self-esteem, I will tell you, is at the core. For all the girls' research that I've looked at and time that I've spent with young ladies, that's at the core, is that they feel that they have no value. If you felt you had value, you probably could tell a perpetrator who was coming after you to take a hike, because you're worth more than that. But girls who have had some abuse in the background don't always have that innate ability to feel that they're worth more than that. Do they have that history of abuse? Are they teenagers? That puts them in just because of their age, it actually puts them in a risk bracket. Their brains are still developing, right? They oftentimes don't make the best choices or follow things through. Identifying as LGBTQ. LGBTQ is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, or questioning. That population's at higher risk, oftentimes if they are excluded from their family environment, if they're alienated from their friends at school because there's something wrong with you. Oftentimes their self-esteem is going to be impacted, and then they could fall victim to this as well. Mental health issues that haven't been addressed, developmental learning disabilities, and then environmental factors. So are things present in the community that make these kids more susceptible to this particular issue? Transient male population. For example, in San Diego, one of our growing issues is the fact that we have so many military bases. When you've got a lot of military bases in your area, you tend to have a higher rate of children being prostituted. So something to consider: poverty, lack of resources, violence or DV, or proximity to borders. Although you're not next to a border, you're close to large cities. When there are major games, for example, sporting matches in Las Vegas, or at the Staples Center, a huge concert, Comic-Con in San Diego, girls from your area will be taken to be moved around because they get worked in different areas for different events. They don't always just stay in one particular area. There's times when girls don't even know what community they're in because they've been moved around so much. So here's a trajectory that I want you to be familiar with. This, a continuum, comes from Girls Educational Mentoring Services out of New York, which in my opinion is the model program for having rehabilitative services for girls who've been exploited. Wonderful program out of New York. But if you think of Sarah, when you're looking at this continuum, there were things in her background that most people don't know, that the video doesn't share. And I always share this with my students. The violation of boundaries starts pretty early on for child sexual abuse. And when I look at Sarah's history, there were some major events that happened in her life, starting with the age of 5. What do you think happened to her at the age of 5? She was molested by one of mom's boyfriends. So at 9, she's diagnosed with depression at school. Then at 10, something else happens to her. Happened again, molested by one of mom's boyfriends. So she's being groomed for this in a sense, right? We use the word being indoctrinated into this. A lot of people say brainwashing. Indoctrinated is another term for that, is that you start to fall into these patterns. So there were definitely violation of boundaries. She's feeling guilty and shameful that she did something, right, because she was violated. You move forward in Sarah's life at 13, who comes into her life? Perpetrator, right? Gigi came into her life at 13, okay? And at 13, another major event happened in her life that was very traumatic. She's gang raped at 13. So again, this pattern of abuse continues and continues and continues, right? So when this man enters her life and, but you're beautiful and I love you and I'm going to take care of you, she believes it. Any 13-year-old girl would, because it's what they want to hear. That's why we have to give them those other buffer and protective skills of, you got to feel that for yourself from within yourself. You can't get your self-esteem from someone else. It has to come from within you. Okay, so just a continuum that I want you to be aware of can lead to running away, living in poverty, etc. And then again, almost makes them this prime candidate for a potential trafficker to come into their life. Some indicators that counselors, professionals can look at, community folks can look at this. If you have a youth who's diagnosed with depression, are they lacking health care? When you see them, are they just physically not taken care of? It could be that they've run away, she's not eating right, doesn't look that she's well groomed, for example. So those are some indicators that we would look at the school site, for example. It appears malnourished. Sarah's hours were from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. If you remember, she said that in the video. So of course she's not sleeping. Of course she's not coming to school. That's something else that we've seen in a lot of these cases. What do a lot of the victims have in common? They're habitual truants. So why do we need START and SAR boards? Because they're looking at attendance and truancy issues for kids, because that's a major risk factor for them. Branded with tattoos, gangs do this quite a bit, and so do traditional traffickers, where basically they label a girl as if she were property, so that's something that someone might be able to see. Inconsistencies in stories, so if 1 minute she's telling you one thing, and then you think, okay, she said she was staying at a friend's house, and now she lives with her mom, and things are confusing, not making sense. Oftentimes it's because they don't want to tell you the truth, so they're lying quite a bit to kind of cover what's really happening. So inconsistencies in stories is one that you might want to look at. And then recurring STD, so if there's nurses, for example, watching or in the audience, that's something that you would flag, is what is going on with this particular teen where she's coming in repeatedly for sexually transmitted infections or STDs. drug or alcohol use, you're trying to medicate, you're trying to cope in some way. And unfortunately for some kids, access to drug use is the perfect way for them to cope because they have no other coping skills, right? They're young, they don't necessarily know this. So for them, it's if I just check out and am numb, that helps me get through it. So it's a very common thing that we see with kids. And disengagement from education. So you may have the best teacher in the world, but when you have all of this going on, the best teacher in the world may not be enough for you to still be engaged in school, especially when you've got a perpetrator who's threatening you, with violence if you do attend school. Okay, so I want to also just mention to you that there are a couple documentaries that you can all look at. We use Indoctrinated in San Diego because it's a film that we paid to have the final editing done for. It's 33 minutes long. It talks about different stories of survivors because they go from being victims to survivors. And so we talk with youth, parents, and prevention practitioners, and we give them a 101 introduction into this topic, and we let kids know. You need to be aware of the internet. You need to be aware when you're hanging out at the mall and some strange older guy is talking to you. It's not normal behavior to have somebody in their 30s come approach you. And a lot of times girls who are looking for that attention are flattered, and they'll tell me, oh, but Ms. Baeza, he was really hot. Tell him, he's 32 years old. He's disgusting. He's a pedophile. He should be in jail. That's what I tell them. Because that's the truth. Because they're looking at you, they're wanting to prey on you, not because you're going to provide stimulating conversation. And they're like, what? I'm very real with my kids because you can't afford to fluff this stuff because they're not fluffing it. Okay, so that's one that you all can, if you're interested, you can see Betsy. I left a couple copies for her. You're welcome to see it. It comes with a study guide that we pieced together that schools can use just as a basic introduction to the topic. And then this is a great film that I've purchased in my office. It's called Sex and Money, A National Search for Human Worth. Wonderful documentary, very eye-opening. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic and you want to maybe show this, at a meeting or at home, I encourage you to visit their website. It only costs $20, so they're not looking to make a huge profit. It really is just to get the word out. But another great film that you can refer to after today for additional information. And then basic things that you can do. I give people real basic things because if I come up and I say, well, hire, 3 additional counselors at each school site or pay for additional law enforcement, we can start small. And there's things that you can just leave as soon as you go home today. So one is talk to youth or talk to someone about what you learned. What stood out? I always ask kids, what stood out to you in today's session? What did you learn? What was new to you? What was eye-opening? Something's resonating with you, share that with someone else and then begin a dialogue. You can view Sarah's story through her website. You can go to YouTube and see the video. Use the right terminology. So again, it's victim of prostitution or they have been prostituted, right? 2 main things, but oftentimes people mistakenly will say, oh yeah, it's this child prostitute. And just say, oh, actually, just so you know, not very PC. It's not what we want to use. It's that they have been victimized. They've been exploited. So it makes a difference when we refer to them a certain way. And then you can offer parent workshops, have your connections at faith-based groups, whoever has a room that can host a large audience, have ongoing dialogue with the community. And I've worked with schools that oftentimes are afraid. They say, Gabby, if I offer this workshop, they're going to think that I have a problem here. And I tell them, but we do. We do. It's our community. So the fact that you're being proactive is not that you're saying, oh, we have this major issue. We want to do something about this issue, and we're no longer going to be ignorant to the fact that this stuff is happening. And it's no fault to your city. It's that these people are out there. In San Diego, our problem is gangs. Gangs are driving the sexual exploitation industry in our county because the gangs are huge there. And they realize, oh, it's huge profit. Instead of doing a drug sale, which is a one-time transaction, they can sell a youth over and over and over and over again. Huge profit. So we have multiple problems of layers in our county because now a lot of it, like I said, is gang-driven. But offering education for people. Host a screening of movies. Have a dialogue. What did you learn? What did you think? What can we do? Encourage kids to get involved. Have schools develop a comprehensive protocol. I know we have some school folks here tonight. Look at how do we respond when you have a youth coming in for services at the counseling office and you suspect that it's sexual exploitation. What is our protocol? Do I make a CPS referral, but if the potential trafficker is a parent, is that the safest route to take? Those are things we have to consider, is who's the trafficker? Because we could be putting her in more danger. right? So having a protocol, if you're interested in that, I can send you more information on how you can start that, some real basic steps that each school can have. Have kids develop an awareness campaign, get them excited. When I talk to youth about it, it hits home. And I tell, even for the men in the room, I say, we use the word pimp like it's a good thing. So I have them, tell me now how you view the word pimp. And they'll say, well, I'm embarrassed that I use it because it means you're describing a monster, right? So now you change your terminology, right? So something as simple as that can have a huge impact on kids. And then share what you've learned. I mentioned this earlier, but real basic idea. If you're on social media, do a Facebook post. Talk about what you learned. You can email somebody or do face-to-face. Say, hey, I just want to have a conversation. And FYI, did you know all this stuff? Most people don't because it's not in their world. So they're not familiar with it. You'll probably shock quite a few people. But just giving them the information is the first step, is making them aware that, wow, this actually does happen in the US, and I didn't realize it was happening in our community. I didn't realize that. So now what can I do? Can you donate to programs that are reaching out? Can you offer services? Is there a ministry through a church that you're connected to that can do street outreach for these kids? Things like that. There's tons of things we can do. You just have to pick one. And maybe today it's that you just begin to share and have dialogue. That's the first step, is have dialogue with someone and then see what comes from that. So just some basic ideas I wanted to present. I know we've got time for Q&A, and I don't know if we start with you all here and then with the audience, but whatever format, just let me know. But I appreciate your time before we do questions and answers. I'm hoping that I leave you with some things to really think about and process. It's the same experience with kids, is that they're sitting there thinking, wow, I had no idea. And then they almost become enraged over it. So I'm hoping you have a knot in your stomach. And I tell people, I know it sounds strange for me to say that, but I hope that you do, because that tells me that it hit home and that you want to continue to have dialogue around this issue and do something for your local community. So thank you again for your time and for having me out. I sincerely appreciate the time.
Gabby, your last slide says thank you, but it's we who should thank you. So let me ask the panel members, including the ones sitting right in front, are there any questions for Gabby that you would like to ask?
I have two questions. Because I saw they both pertain to Sarah and her situation. Number one, I only saw the aunts featured, what happened to the mother. And then the second question is, and I guess to piggyback on that, are those aunts positive role models and that kind of thing? And then my second question is if we write letters to Governor Brown pleading with him, would that be helpful?
So same questions that kids actually ask, because they're always curious. So where is mom? So aunts are, first of all, a supportive force in her life. They still are connected to her. I think one aunt still actually lives in Riverside County. The other one does not. I think she lives up north. Mom has taken no responsibility for what has happened. She has done an interview. Recently it was on the Dr. Phil show. And mom says, I have no recollection of that. It's a real common term when people are not wanting to take responsibility. I have no recollection of that. She says that happened. I don't remember that. You have to understand too, mom, while this was happening, her issue was a drug abuse, right? So she was not in the best frame of mind to be a supportive, loving, nurturing mom, right? So mom had her own trauma, I'm sure, that was not informed or not addressed in her background. But to this day, Sarah has no communication with her. The few times that they have talked in the 19 years that she's been incarcerated, it has not been a healthy experience. And the last time that kids ask Sarah this all the time, and so I saw one of the letters, and she said, at this point, I have chosen to no longer communicate with her because it's toxic. She's not willing to accept, and I need to just forgive and let that go, to move on, because she just wasn't in the right frame of mind to be able to help me. But she's not going to admit it, and so I need to let that go. Yeah, and you had another question, I believe, right?
Writing to Governor Brown.
Oh, yes. I believe that would be helpful. There are people that have campaigned for her, encouraging. Now, the good thing is that the parole board had made that decision. So Sarah's hopeful. Even in her letter today, she says, I'm going to get to actually text. She's never sent a text in her life, so she's excited to send a text. I tell kids, I know, believe it or not everyone sent a text. It's hard to believe, I know. What would we do without that? But she says, I'm going to actually text you or call you, come November 9th, because she has a very good feeling. Now, could it be that he says no? It's possible, but I don't believe that it would hurt to advocate. We've done a lot of that advocating already, which I think is what helped to get her that parole hearing initially. So we're just waiting. He has until November 9th. The decision could come earlier. So if there were, I'm sure, hundreds of letters, maybe he'd say enough and make an early decision. I don't know. We could pressure him. But the last day possible would be on the 9th. That would be the 150 days after the hearing.
Any panel members? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to follow up a little bit on what you said, it's taken her this long to realize that her mother is a toxic influence. Is that common? Because kids seem to always want to forgive and hope things will be better.
Yes, and it's hard for those of us on the outside to understand that dynamic. One of my first experiences with that was at a Polinsky Center down in San Diego, was the receiving home. So when kids are pulled from their home, that's where they would go. And I was told, can you escort this youth up to the front because she's going to have dinner time with her mom. She hasn't seen her mom in a while. And I knew that mom had severely beaten this child because the child had disclosed that in our little interaction. When she saw mom, she ran towards her and clung to her and kissed her. And I realized, I thought, oh, I'm surprised that was the reaction. And then I realized that is all that kid has. That is it. Even if they are an unattentive parent, abusive parent, that is all that kid has. Because without mom, they're in the system. That's it. And so even when you think, how can she go and hug and kiss her mom who put her here, and put her in the hospital because she beat her so bad, but that's her mother. So it's hard for us to understand, and we judge that, right? We think, oh, I would never talk to that person again. But for a kid, we think that's all I have. So Sarah, you see this oftentimes with kids where, although it's a very volatile situation at home, oftentimes with their mom, that's very common for girls, just so you know, to have a very strained relationship with mom, because typically there's been abuse in the home, and mom, if she knew, perhaps didn't do anything. So there's a lot of resentment. And so unfortunately, kids, although they go back and forth, that is still their family, their only really connection, unless they have connections elsewhere. But it's the same situation for Sarah, is that was all really she had. She didn't have a dad in the picture.
Thank you.
Steve?
Those policymakers.
One, I think, I mentioned the school district piece earlier. There's nothing in our school ed code, that says we have to have protocols for this. There's nothing that says we have to have curriculum that addresses teen relationship violence. We've tried, well, how are you going to mandate them? Where's the money going to come from? If we could get together and work with school districts and law enforcement and prevention service providing agencies and say, we need to have an ongoing dialogue and community response to this particular issue, so we are all on the same page, so that we're not competing for, who hosted that training, or who responded this way. Let's have a uniform way of responding. The Grossmont Unified School District in San Diego, I will give them a nice little shout out. They have done an incredible job of being able to bring together law enforcement, community agencies, and school district personnel to sit at the table and actually have memorandums of understanding where they're, binding documents that say we will play nice together. We will for the sake of our kids. So when there's a case that comes up at the school site level or at a service agency provider, there's a specific protocol that they have to follow. It includes information sharing between these agencies, and they considered HIPAA violation and all of that, but they realized this is for the safety of this child. It means that we have to talk and have dialogue. And so that could be the first step, is really looking at, so what are some models that we could begin to have? They really are the only district that I know of, even in San Diego County, that have a comprehensive protocol. Most of the time, people aren't even trained. They're not training nurses, they're not training teachers, they're not providing them with that basic information. So it could be, perhaps we look at that within these cities that are represented here, is so what type of training can we provide that is ongoing to support the people that are on the ground level with our kids? Having policies around that would be one of the first cities to do that, is that you could actually work together to make that happen. So that's just one idea, because when people are coming across these cases, they're oftentimes working in isolation, and I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't realize all of these risk factors actually equaled CSEC. I never thought about that. I thought it was just she's living this crazy life. So even just giving them the skills, so if we could promote partnerships that way through a memorandum of understanding is helpful because you bring all of the stakeholders to the table. So that could be facilitated with superintendents, law enforcement, so your chief of police, all of the key players in your community to say, what will be our protocol? How do we respond as a community? And that it's the same everywhere.
Before we move from that question, let me put you on the spot. Melissa, why don't you come on up and share the microphone? Because I think since you run SAFE, that the question that was asked by Steve is really relevant for you based upon your experience with all of the school districts and law enforcement in this area.
Well, I think the examples that she's talking about, doing memorandum of understanding and providing, because we do the services she's talking about. We have teen dating violence curriculums. We have Girl Circle, which they also run in San Diego, and it's really hard to get in and work with the schools and to be able to set those protocols up. But that's what we already do, those services, but we do them on site now at our site. We would be more than willing to come and get back into the school system and do that because these are the kids we're already serving. So, and there's other partners that do those types of things already, and I'm more than willing to come to Lake Elsinore and talk about how we can expand that. And we can teach folks in your district to do it. And that's really what I think, to me, what makes most sense is train the trainers, get the programs out, because nobody can bear the burden of doing, I don't have the resources to come to every single school site. And we can always say if we had more money, we'd do, but that's the answer is really getting each district to be able to do that. And I would be happy to do that as SAFE because we already do those services. We just can't be everywhere. And it all kind of comes back to the same thing. If you saw her slide of the risk factors, those are all the same kids that we've been talking about. It keeps coming back to the same thing. And if we build their resiliency and help them get some skills, we've dealt with every issue: drug use, abuse, truancy. It all kind of comes back to the same thing, and we have to build these kids up, and that's what those programs are for. So I'd be willing certainly to sit with folks and help develop how that's going to roll out. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you certainly did. Next questioner.
I've got a question. Is law enforcement doing its part to prosecute the people who pimp underage children?
I can't answer for all law enforcement. I will say that that paradigm shift that I talked about earlier, law enforcement, like all of us, used to use that word prostitute, right? It was very common. Vice units, for example, that this was their life, the cases they worked. That's beginning to change, but it's taken time, training, ongoing support. Oftentimes they'll come out and do a piece of the training and say, yeah, we're the vice unit, and we are also looking at these girls as victims now, whereas in the past we didn't. The problem is laws take so long to change and catch up with where we are. So for example, I always tell people, if Sarah's case happened today, she probably would not have gotten life, right, because of what we know.
I guess my question relates more specifically to the people that are pimping. Are we finding that law enforcement are getting those people behind bars?
They're arresting them, but cops don't. They're not necessarily responsible for putting them there, right? It's the DAs and the court system. And the problem with these cases, although they work a wonderful case, have testimonies from witnesses, oftentimes because she's been indoctrinated, she will recant when the case goes to court. So even though they have all of this ready to go and they're thinking he's going to get more than the typical misdemeanor, which is a typical sentencing for a pimp. So what happens is they're ready to push forward. Now, there have been cases where girls testified and were witnesses, and definitely that contributed to them getting actually multiple years in felonies and time. That's beginning to happen. But
didn't the new law specify that it was a felony for trafficking minors?
Now it is.
And is that being prosecuted, or is is the DA office prosecuting using that law at this point?
I can't answer for them because I don't represent their office, but from the ones that I have worked with and connect to, they definitely are moving down that road, only because this is finally new and finally here. So I feel like, fine, I can finally attach a felony, But when you're talking multiple years for a sentencing, you need to be able to have people that testify. That's still the ongoing problem, is they'll have, like I said, a wonderful case and they're ready to go. And unless they can prove that with witnesses or testimonies, oftentimes a lot of that is undone. But definitely the fact that it's a felony now for the first time, I'm thinking, why did it take so long, right? That's finally happened. But perhaps we'll see an influx of these cases in the next couple of years when this case is the law is put into practice. That could be what we see.
I would suggest that as legislators, probably in Sacramento, but still that people talk to you and come up with what can we prosecute, what can we do to get these people off the streets. If the law is too vague now or demands too much proof, if you will, for a felony conviction, maybe the law needs to be changed. We need to get the guys off the streets, whatever it takes.
And you also bring up another good point. That's why it's so important that we're having this dialogue with school folks and community providers, because the information they're collecting helps build that case. The school resource officers that are at the school site, for example, they are our first responders to this case. So giving them that initial training and saying, this is how we respond to this case, you're starting to collect evidence. Assistant principals that do a lot of that investigative work when they're interviewing kids, all of that can help build a case. So giving them those skills is an extremely positive force, because you can provide additional information from the school site that law enforcement maybe wouldn't have initially. Is I can tell you how many times she's come into the counseling office for support. The nurse can tell you how many times she's had to refer to the clinic because of STDs, et cetera. So providing them with that additional information can definitely build a case. That's why if everyone is on the same page talking and leveraging resources can impact and have a positive impact.
Task Force.
Just everything that we've been hearing seems to indicate that when these victims are identified, they're probably at least middle school to high school age. And what we've just heard is that starts much earlier, and a lot of these indications are apparent, but they have to be put together. What can we do to identify this earlier?
One is that we have ongoing dialogue with our students about these critical issues. Oftentimes we'll wait, for example, Red Ribbon Week, and you have schools and communities that will put up red ribbons for that week. I tell them, Red Ribbon Week should not be 1 week. Kids are exposed to drug use all year long. It's the same with gang prevention. It's the same, with risk and resiliency research. It's the same with something like this. So giving, like Melissa said, kids those tools that they need early on. That's the whole struggle with our prevention work, is people say, well, how do you know it works? I'll know it works if they didn't end up in the system and they led a good life. But that's going to take me a long time, right? How do I prove that the dollars are really effective? But if we start at a very young age, teaching them simple things such as being wise with who you're talking to on the internet, for girls specifically, building up their self-esteem, programs like Girl Circle that Melissa mentioned, encouraging them to join sports, basic things that we can do that oftentimes we think, oh, it's not this full-blown, incredibly expensive program. No, it's quality time with our kids, away from a gadget, away from the actually having basic conversations with them, having basic meaningful dialogue, encouraging them to be in leadership activities, encouraging them to be activists in their communities. Real simple things that we know buffer kids is what we call a protective factor. Having them be involved in faith-based organizations, having them be volunteers, having them read for pleasure is a protective factor for kids. There's plenty of them. You can actually go to the Search Institute. Searchinstitute.org provides you a list of 40 internal and 20 internal and 20 external developmental assets. We know what can help a kid be successful. Oftentimes they don't have it at home, they don't have it at school, and they don't have it in the community. So if we look at that list of things, say, well, what do we currently have? What are we missing? And what do we currently have that we can offer our kids? But it's helping them at a very young age. You have to build them up. Like you're saying, it doesn't happen when they're 14 or 15 and all of a sudden. No, there's been things in their background, starting at the elementary level, where prevention could have been in place for them that could have provided a buffer. So starting earlier, giving them that healthy start from the beginning would be extremely important.
Okay, seeing no further questions from the task force, are there any questions from the members of the public sitting out here? Yes, sir. Just stand up and shout it out.
Congress under the Pentagon to brain injury. Dr. Messer worked with a group of Kaiser study under the CDC, the Centers for the CDC. The whole study was called ACEs, that adverse childhood experience. Brought out in this conversation. Adverse childhood experience. Look at the website, I suggest everybody look at it. Where the adverse childhood experience is down the bottom, and then it builds into these different displays. A lot of other things, and essentially, the pyramid points to an outcome of early death. So, we've got a big aspect here, and that is that the emotional issues, part of it, keeps us forward to being the best. Do your documentation. That's very important.
You know, that survey that he's referring to, over 17,000 people participated in that. Amazing research. So basically, you're able to say all of these things have happened in their background that can lead to heart disease, cancer, and for a lot of them, it was early death. So the fact that you're piecing together all of these pieces, the puzzle begins to come together for all of us, is we need to start to prevent a lot of these things from happening at an earlier age to then prevent all of these traumatic events from continuing in their life and then impacting their health and well-being down the road. But incredible study, by the way. I'm glad that if you're not familiar, again, it's ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, that you can all Google that and you'll find the research.
Any other members of the public? Ma'am?
I'm not too familiar with your communities, but I do know, I have heard from people that have worked here in a lot of the truck stop areas. It's a very common place for it to happen. I'm not quite sure here if it's similar to my county where it's gang-based. I don't want to speak for law enforcement, but if there's anyone else here that would know that, it'd be great to share. But I don't have that personal information. But I can definitely connect you if you all don't know with people here. I'm sure you already have those connections, but from what I know, it definitely is happening like it is in all other counties. I just don't know the specifics or dynamics for your particular community.
When we up here make our closing remarks, I will address your question. Okay, seeing nobody else from the public, how about if we have closing remarks, we can start with Mr. Brown, go to Mr. Holstrom, and then over to Mr. Vargas and work our way across the dais.
Just wanted to say thank you for an enlightening presentation.
Thank you. Kudos to it. It's a very good presentation. I think I made this comment before at other meetings, and basically, it seems like the key component here is collaboration between everybody. The parents, it's not just us, the school districts and police. The parents have to really be involved too. And a lot of times, oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced it, this happened right underneath the parents' nose. They don't even know what's going on with their own children. So I think we definitely need to educate, besides our children, but the parents need to be brought into as well for the solution.
I just want to thank you as well. As a father of 3 daughters, it's they may never go out again. But it is an eye opener, and I want to thank you. I think the idea of having certain protocols in place and that early intervention, if not identification, is so important. So thank you.
I'd just like to echo that as well. I keep hearing comments like it's hard to work with the schools and it's tough to get this kind of thing in the curriculum or within the structure, but I do know that the school districts do take this very seriously, and because everybody is a mandated reporter, the object is to be able to identify and then to act. And one of the things that I do know, and from knowing a lot of the school districts in the area, is that there are programs in place. It's just a matter of rekindling the need. And I think your presentation today has created that urgency. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will be sharing Sarah's story.
Well, thank you.
I'd also like to thank you very much. I actually happen to sit on the subcommittee with our local school district. And I wish they had shown up tonight, because often what we're hearing does tend to interact with the school districts and collaboration. I will be working with my colleagues from that school district to find out what their protocols are in place, and to see if they're lacking, of course. We're going to try to go ahead and work to make it better. So thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. Hopefully something real good will come of it.
I'd like to speak to you as a mother. I have 6, 3 girls. So, and we're incredibly conscious. You know, we're fortunate that I do have the time to stay at home with. In fact, I've got to get home to homework. But I see several parents in the audience, and my encouragement, because I have a Down syndrome son, so this is a very, very real situation for us, where we've said, okay, your brother is very prone to be victimized. And so talk to your kids, because you know what? Sometimes these kids aren't going to talk to the adult. The friends are going to hear it first. The friends are going to hear the horror stories. The friends are going to hear the bragging maybe. They're going to notice the maybe not feeling comfortable changing in the locker room in PE or any of these other things. While we don't need our kids to grow up any faster, you don't have to go explicitly to say, you know, we want to make sure your friend's not hurt. So if you do notice your friend or anybody that even isn't your friend, that maybe isn't, go to it, because they do have those trusted teachers. They do have those trusted mentors within the school district that they can go to them and say, it's okay to be a tattletale or to be worried about your friendship. So I would encourage parents to sit down and talk to their parents, to their kids about this, quite frankly, so those kids can be the first responders to their peers. So thank you for your story, and I will be writing Governor Brown.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for coming. It's nice of you to draw attention to such an important topic.
Thank you very much. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do. I've been thinking about it, what I'm going to do with this information. I will share it with our community, our next city council meeting, and encourage the parents. I like the idea of talking to their own children to be the first responders. That's a great idea. Thank you very much for that. And also to inquire at their schools to see how these things are being handled. We will see where we go from there. I thank you.
Yes.
City of San Jacinto, we've got a great working relationship with our school district, and I'll sit down and talk to the council, our city staff, and along with our law enforcement, we have a very close relationship to see if there's anything we can do to partner with John and the school district people, and anything they need that we can help to move this along. I'm sure we can get a campaign going out there. We are still a small town, and we can make a lot of noise in a hurry when we need to, right, John?
But can you raise the funding?
Well, I'd like to thank you for a great presentation, very informative, and I know we all have a lot to think about now. I would also like to echo your recommendation of the 40 developmental assets. That's something in Murrieta Valley that we've been training our staff on for, gosh, at least 10 years. And for those of you who aren't aware of that, those are, once you look at that, you're going to see those are like vaccines to prevent your kids from becoming involved in this and all the other topics that we've talked about over the series of these meetings. And it would help you with your 3 daughters being able to allow them to go out. You see, oh, you've got 35 of those 40 assets. I can let you go out because I know you're safe in the community and know how to resist those temptations. So I'd really encourage everybody to look into that. And I know from Murrieta Valley, that's been one of our guiding philosophies to keep our after-school programs, our arts, our sports, and as much as possible, in spite of the terrible funding cuts we've endured, to keep those programs available for our kids, because that connection to adults in our school programs and being involved and busy doing good things is really, really vital in preventing kids from slipping into these kind of dangers. So thank you for coming.
I just want to add that a couple of months ago I had a presentation done from someone from Riverside County on the same topic. And the trends seem to be almost identical to San Diego. A lot of gang activity here in the Inland Empire. What was kind of shocking to me is we have the old stereotypes about the male pimps, but to find out that a lot of the young girls, 12 or 13, are actually encouraging their friends to become victims as they are, and to encourage them to dedicate their lives to the life of this crime. And that was surprising, because you always think about the men that target these young vulnerable women and girls and set them off the path, but to find out that it was females as well, that was very surprising to me. But I do know that they are having a special unit here in Riverside County, and they are targeting and making sure there's prosecution. They're even taking some of the young girls into Mexico to the brothels, and that came out. We saw a video on that. So I really think as long as we continue to talk about it and to network and spread the word that this is a prevalent problem, not just in San Diego or Southwest Riverside County, but nationally, and to all be aware. And when our children start doing things or changing habits, to really be on top of that and encourage people to look out for all of the danger signs and changes in behavior. So thank you once again.
Fascinating and scary presentation. Couple of disparate thoughts. Number one, it is about parents talking to their children. My youngest is 39, my oldest is 44 of the 3 of them. And while times change, speaking to your children is still an important task for parents. Because I was military, I will say my wife raised our children, and she did a pretty good job. She was a nurse with a degree in psychology, and at our house there were always young kids around the house. And I remember hearing the comment to my kids from some of their friends, "Oh, what you just told your mom, I could never tell my parents that." And that's a danger sign. Now, regarding Southwest Riverside County, attitude, gangs, we don't have gangs. Teenage prostitution, victims, we don't have that here. We're middle-class communities, and we have high average incomes. Parents have good jobs. Guess what? A lot of those good jobs are in San Diego. So what's that tell you about how often the parents are home for their kids? So if there's anybody out here who thinks that the evils of the world are not here in this area, you are mistaken. The words that you used were residential brothel. So most of our cops came from someplace else. A couple years ago, one of our cops who had come out of the San Diego gang detail was just cruising the neighborhood and went, I know those guys. That was the pimpin' daddy hose. Just like everybody else, as the markets were appreciating and then crashed, they bought cheap housing here in Marietta. So how did they get those girls to be their victims? A lot of what you said is quite accurate. In addition, there was the fear and the intimidation that these folks used. The word victim, teenage prostitution ring, teenage prostituted ring, teenage victim ring. Those young girls were making money for this gang from San Diego that had migrated here. They're all doing hard time, but there was an awful lot of charges besides the initial prostitution charge for these guys. And the gang leader, who made one of the cardinal mistakes, from his jailhouse phone, he told his mom, "She's going to talk. I want her killed." He's away forever. Now, today, I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and he didn't know that we were doing this. It was not part of the conversation. But he's a very savvy individual, and he said to me, "Yeah, one of the problems I'm having is that my 19-year-old daughter has got a guy who showed up in her life who's 27, and I checked him out, and he has 3 TROs, temporary restraining orders, against him. I contacted this young man and told him, you are a predator. If you get anywhere near my daughter, there will be serious consequences." Most folks aren't savvy enough to understand what's going on. Just because your daughter is 19 doesn't mean that she has all the good common sense in the world that you would hope for her. And the last thing to Mr. Brown, one of the problems, particularly in Riverside County and the state of California, courts, understaffed, underfunded, overworked. To get on the docket right now, you have to have a very solid case. And as you said, these particular cases oftentimes just melt and fall apart before the DA can come before the court. So, we have police members in our audience right now, and they do arrest these predators. But it's up to the justice system to take the next step. Gabrielle, you were a phenomenal speaker. You have a phenomenal amount of information at your grasp. The sad part about that is it came the hard way because the need is so great out there. So I hope that when you go through life, you say to God, give me the strength to go on because this is tough work. Thank you for being here. Brian, cookies in the next room? Anybody want some cookies? The room on the other side of the door, we got cookies. So thank you all for coming.